We are so fortunate to live in an area with so many conservation areas that reflect the natural beauty of our open spaces, woodlands, wetlands, and coastal habitat.
In just a few minutes, we're going to take you on an adventure to one of these areas that you definitely don't want to miss.
Welcome to Trails of Discovery with your co-host Bob Mellers
And Sky Thaxter.
Trails of Discovery is a series that explores our natural resources that exist practically in your backyard here in Norwell.
The Hatch Lots is a 44-acre conservation area established by the Norwell Conservation Commission. There are 4 entrances. One is here where we are standing at Grove Street, off of Grove Street, and the other is in the Edward Park neighborhood. In 2020, a trail was constructed from the Hatch Lots to the Simon Hill Bowker Conservation Area. The entrances there are on Simon Hill Road and across from 200 Bowker Street at the entrance to the Water Department's land. There is limited parking in some of those areas. If you need a map to the area, you can put your phone up here and use the QR code and it will give you this map. In colonial times, the area around us was divided into long lots. The owners of these long lots utilized the timber to construct houses or outbuildings, and also to heat their homes. Nearby us to the east is Burnt Plain Swamp, where there were a lot of cedar trees that they used to making roof shingles. The family that owned this place was called Hatch, which was a pretty common name in those days. Samuel Hatch and his 2 sons owned this land and utilized it until 1844.
As we enter the conservation area, you need to be sure you dress properly for the time of year and bring plenty of water and your camera. Sky is seen carrying a backpack that contains water, a snack, and sunscreen. Because of the potential for tick exposure, especially the deer tick, wear lightly colored clothes and tuck your pant legs into your socks, as seen here with Sky. The deer tick can carry Lyme disease and other infectious diseases. Consult your local outdoor sports business as to what products they recommend that repel ticks. With us today is Steve Ives, a naturalist and wetland scientist, to talk about this area.
Thanks, Bob and Sky. Very appreciated being invited today to this wonderful and interesting and fascinating place. It's a wonderful, wonderful day here, good weather, and we have Canada Mayflower. It's a spring ephemeral. It's called an ephemeral because it's catching the rays of sunlight and growing during the spring season before the other deciduous leaves come out. So it usually comes up and you'll see a flower in the next few weeks, and it will seed all before the leaves come out on the regular trees or the larger trees. It's called Canada Mayflower, also called false lily of the valley. Its Latin name is Mayanthrumum canadense. The canadense is for Canada, Mayanthrumum is for Mayflower. So it's a wonderful thing, and I love to see it in the early spring time, and it gives me a sense of everything is popping up, and we're going to see a lot more little flowers in the next few weeks. Why don't we go this way and take a look at this little stream ahead of us?
Sounds great.
Here I am in the wetland next to a little intermittent stream with my hand on a northern spice bush. We've just missed the blooming of the northern spice bush in this wetland, and there's quite a few of them. It's a very beautiful yellow bloom in the early spring. This is 25th of April, and we're already past it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the wetland and how it came to be a wetland. If you look just behind me, you'll see a windthrow that came down very recently. What we have here is we have all the roots above the ground here. They will take at least 25 to 50 years to drop and create a mound of soil. Where the roots came out of is going to be a pit. If you look across the wetland, you'll see pit and mound topography. That's why it's called pit and mound. My theory is that these trees either get wind thrown over, or they go over because they've killed themselves by being too wet and gone down and dropped into the wetlands and had problems exchanging oxygen. So they go over and they create this pit and mound topography. We've had this topography in this area since the Wisconsin glaciation of 10,000 years ago. So what we're seeing is a 10,000-year-old pit and mound topography, and it's created this wetland. Now, if we look into the wetland itself, at my feet, we have the skunk cabbage, the large leaves there. We have some blue flag irises that we can see that are very narrow-leaved. And we have one invasive plant here, which is the Japanese barberry that's growing up right here. And we're looking at this little intermittent stream. It's about 4 feet wide and about 3 inches deep. It starts up behind Hornstra's farm to the east of the farm itself in a little area there, and works its way east. Here we are at an intermittent stream. An intermittent stream is one that doesn't flow year-round. I also noticed the lack of plants either coming out of the soil of the stream bed or directly adjacent to the stream. That's another factor in intermittent streams. The size of the gravel in the stream also tells us a little bit about the slope and the flow of the stream. So this is good sized gravel, so it must have a good flow during portions of the year. This flow continues to the east and then to the north across Grove Street into the Boston Basin.
Wow, Steve, we've come to an amazing area. Behind me, it's all woodlands, and in front of me is all Greenlands.
Yes, we're at number 1, just before the trail diverges off and makes a fork to the swamp. And behind us, we see a woodland that is mostly hardwoods. It's oaks and beeches. And the reason they're there is they're growing on very difficult soils, unsorted gravel that's dropped by the glacier. Behind me, it sort of looks like a drumlin, just a long, low drumlin here. And in front of me, we have the wetland area, which drops off about 10 or 15 feet. Why don't we take a look at that? So we're here on the other side of the trail, facing northeast and looking down slope here. And look at what happens here with the trees. These hardwoods completely stop, and the softwoods start down on the bottom of the slope. It's a really interesting toe of slope situation. I would have fun flagging it because I'd flag right along the toe of the slope, which is pretty obvious location. And we have wetlands here that look like it's probably a 10,000-year-old old large pond area that became a wetlands complex after everything filled in and trees started growing on it.
Well, Steve, it looks like we've made it to the Burnt Plain Swamp, and they've made a nice boardwalk so you can walk into the swamp.
Absolutely. We've just come over a small section of the swamp, and then we've come up on this little tiny drumlin, which has got about 5 feet of elevation above the swamp. It's like a little island in the swamp, island in the stream. And then we have this boardwalk that reaches all the way across to the next portion of upland on Water Department property, Norwell Water Department property. This is all Conservation Commission property here. And this boardwalk, from where we are to Simon Hill or to Bowker Street, is probably on the order of a half-mile long. So it's quite a long ways. I'm going to walk out there now and show you some things. Here I am on the boardwalk here in Burnt Plain Swamp, and the first thing I'd like to show is a very small white flower. It's a very tiny flower, comes up about 3 inches, and it's on this little plant that has a evergreen leaf. The plant is called gold thread because of its roots are gold colored, and it's a wetland indicator, and the leaves are evergreen so that you can see them in the snow in the wintertime. It's quite beautiful. Not many people ever see this little flower in the wild because, number one, you have to be in a wetland to see it, first of all, and number two, you have to actually understand that you're looking at a plant with a flower that has a flower above the plant itself, above the ground, only about 3 inches. It's not showy at all, but it's an interesting little plant. Right next to it is sphagnum moss that holds about 200 times its own dry weight in water. That needs water at or near the surface to exist. In Massachusetts, I think there are 52 or so species of this moss, coming from a thesis that was done in the early 80s on Ponkapog Bog out in Canton-Randolph area. The other thing interesting here is the fiddleheads. This is cinnamon fern. You see the cinnamons oftentimes in the summertime that have the spores on them. And then I'm going to move just a little ways over to this next mound, former mound from where a tree went down, of course, and take a look at, there's a small plant here that will eventually come up to be a star flower with 5, I believe it's got 5 leaves. As we look over the rest of the swamp here, we see a lot of mounds up and down and all around. I'd hate to try to just walk through it by myself. Again, this was a large, flat pond at one time, and now it's grown in and growing in. And in the next 10,000 years, it'll probably be somebody's back lawn eventually, because it's going to grow up and everything will fill in the area. And I'm still on the boardwalk here. Behind me are a couple of evergreen trees. One is a hemlock, and one species is Atlantic white cedars, or AWCs we call in the biz, as it were. The AWCs are responsible for those cedar shingles we spoke about earlier in this presentation. These trees are interesting trees. some of my favorites, and the reason being they grow in water like mangroves, and they have a high, what we call a high stocking density. They can grow together very close to each other, so that when you're trying to walk through very dense Atlantic white cedar swamps, you have a hard time moving through the trees themselves. They are decreasing in numbers due to a couple of things. One of the things is the number of deer that are in this area. We have a carrying capacity of about 20 deer per acre, and presently the Hingham-Norwell area has about 40 deer per acre. So they are vacuuming up all the small Atlantic white cedar seedlings and saplings. They eat them like candy. That's one of the problems we have with them.
Steve, you mentioned that the burnt plain swamp is very close to the Norwell Water Department land. And I wonder if you could talk about sustainability.
Sure. As I'm one of the water commissioners here in Norwell, elected water commissioners, and we had a well number 9 right off of Bowker Street, which we closed down about 6 or 7 years ago due to high iron and high manganese in the water. It was also a small producer. What happens as you get further away from the coast, you get deeper and deeper sands. Like Plymouth, for example, has very deep sands that make very good aquifers or water-bearing soils. Closer to Cohasset and Scituate, they both have surface water reservoirs. They don't have any deep soils at all for aquifers. So we're halfway in between here. So our deepest well is 60 feet. Our deepest pumping well is 60 feet deep, and that's directly adjacent to the Hanover town line off of South Street in Norwell. But here, this well was less than that, and it's taking water that has spent most of its time in the burnt plain swamp. So it's got high iron and manganese. The iron has come off of all the sands in the swamp. Sand has a 2-micron coating of iron on it, and when water moves up and down in the groundwater, in the surface soils, the iron comes off of the sand grains and actually moves down via gravity into deeper soils. And bogs like this are perfect for this to happen, and in fact we have a pond called Tack Factory Pond just a few miles from here in Scituate. I live on Winter Street, which had a tack factory right next to what's now a cranberry bog. And the reason those tack factories existed were that the colonists would mine bog iron. You may have heard of bog iron. They would mine it in the bogs. And basically, it's all this iron that's come off the sand grains, moved down into the water column, and then agglomerated together. And they would mine these pieces of iron, and then produce tacks, guns, door handles, etc., etc. So what we have here is we have a very shallow aquifer. We went looking for deeper aquifer a few years ago, and we spent about $30,000 going down into the ground trying to find an area of bedrock that had fractures in it. And we predicted the bedrock fracture at 320 feet below the surface of the ground. The problem was it was dry. We are going to spend some more money in the next few months doing a couple other boreholes into the bedrock very close to well number 9, just off of Bowker Street. Our situation in Norwell is we're always looking for more water. We at this time of the year and into the winter, we use about 1 million gallons of water a day. plenty of water for people, but not for their lawns. So the problem is we're always looking for more water. We will be doing 2 more boreholes very soon in this area.
Steve, I think it's time to head back towards the beginning of the trail.
You bet.
Okay, great.
Well, this has been quite an adventure today, and thank you, Steve, for sharing your knowledge with us today. But I'm afraid it's that time, once again, to say goodbye until next time on Trails of Discovery. But don't forget to get an ice cream cone on your way home.
Shall do. I'm good with that. And thank you very much for having me. It's been very enjoyable.